For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I proudly rise today in a bipartisan effort to release the Epstein files, finally, after 5 administrations have covered it up. Earlier today, I attended the press conference where the survivors, they're not victims, the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's sexual abuse and sex trafficking told their stories. And they told stories about how it started back in 1991, 1996, and they continued on through the decades.
Before we even get into the full context of this video, let me say this clearly. What you just heard is not political theater. It's an indictment of how deeply broken trust in government has become. When a sitting member of Congress has to fight her own institution just to force transparency on one of the most disturbing criminal cover-ups in modern American history that should stop everyone in their tracks, regardless of party. Representative Marjorie Greene stood on the House floor and said something that Washington almost never says out loud. The Epstein files are not about gossip, not about headlines, not about personalities. They're about survivors who were ignored for decades while powerful people were protected. And whether you agree with Greene on every issue or not, what she is saying here taps directly into why Americans across the political spectrum no longer trust Congress, the DOJ, or federal law enforcement. This is not about left versus right. This is about accountability versus silence. If you believe transparency matters, if you believe survivors deserve the truth, and if you believe government should fear the people, not the other way around, make sure you subscribe to America's Civic Lens, like this video, and share it. Because conversations like this are exactly why this channel exists. Now, let's break down what was actually said and why it matters.
I now yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Georgia, Mrs. Greene.
The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I proudly rise today in a bipartisan effort to release the Epstein files, finally, after 5 administrations have covered it up. Earlier today, I attended the press conference where the survivors, they're not victims, the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's sexual abuse and sex trafficking told their stories. And they told stories about how it started back in 1991, 1996, and they continued on through the decades. And they told stories about how they told someone and tried to get help. They told the FBI, and they weren't listened to. And they told law enforcement, and no one did anything. And these women don't just number a few. These women number around 1,000 women. And they are victims of something that's unthinkable. And this should have never, ever happened. This was the biggest fight I think I've seen in Washington, D.C. This is my 5th year here. And this was a fight that we should have never had to wage. It should have been the easiest thing for every single member of Congress. It should have been the easiest thing for the Speaker of the House. It should have been the easiest thing for the President of the United States to release all the information, every single file, on behalf of these American women. These American women aren't rich, powerful elites. They do not have someone paying for their airline tickets or paying for their trips or paying for their expenses every time they try to do something to get this information out. These are your average Americans. And you want to know what the Epstein files represent, the cover-up represents to average Americans? It represents the failures of the federal government and Congress to the American people. And that is what people rose up about in 2024. They wanted and demanded transparency from their government and for Americans finally to be put first. And today, with this vote, we are finally putting these victims and these survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and the cabal of rich, powerful elites that expands not just here in the United States of America, but to other countries as well. We're putting them last. And that is exactly what Americans want. You see, for far too long, far too long, Americans have been put last. And they're sick of it. They're sick and tired of it. And this is why they don't trust Congress. This is why they don't trust the government. And here's the problem. All of these women who have suffered in shame for years and years and years, women who were terrified, women who were intimidated, women who were threatened, just like Virginia Giuffre. And now she's dead. And these women should have never faced that, for this information to come out. And we, especially the 4 Republican members of the House of Representatives, we should have never faced intimidation and threats for us to get this vote to come to the floor. Never forget, there were 4: Thomas Massie, myself, Nancy Mace, and Lauren Boebert. We had to sign a discharge petition, and we had to fight through intimidation, and we had to endure it for months to push that discharge petition finally to 218 to get this vote to come out. This is what the American people are sick of, and rightfully so. Now, where does this go from here? The question will remain, will the Department of Justice release all the information? Will a judge in New York release the information? Will the CIA release the information? And will foreign governments release their information? Or will this continue after this vote today be a cover-up? A cover-up of the rich, powerful elites that bond together in sex and human trafficking abuse and all types of global business that enriches them but never serves Americans. The American people will know, and the victims, actually the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, will know, because they know the list of names. And I remain dedicated to my promise to read those names here on the House floor if those women ever find them in a place that it needs to be done. I yield back to Mr.
Gentlelady
Massey.
from Georgia yields.
Having watched the full statement, what stands out most is not the rhetoric, it's the substance behind it. Marjorie Taylor Greene is making a claim that many Americans have felt intuitively for years, that the Jeffrey Epstein case represents a systemic failure of federal power, not a one-off mistake. According to her, survivors reported abuse as far back as the early 1990s. They went to the FBI. They went to law enforcement. And nothing happened. That's not incompetence. That's negligence at best and protection at worst. Greene deliberately reframes the narrative by refusing to call these women victims and instead calling them survivors. That distinction matters. It places moral responsibility where it belongs, on the institutions that failed them, and not on the people who were silenced, threatened, and ignored. She also dismantles one of Washington's favorite distractions, elite insulation. These were not powerful women. They weren't wealthy. They didn't have publicists, private jets, or legal teams. They were ordinary Americans trying to be heard in a system that listens upward, not downward. And that's where Greene's argument becomes uncomfortable for Congress. She says plainly that releasing the Epstein files should have been the easiest vote imaginable. No political cost. No moral ambiguity. Just truth. The fact that it required a discharge petition and months of resistance to even bring the issue to the floor says more than any partisan talking point ever could. Her reference to intimidation is particularly telling. When members of Congress claim they were pressured and threatened simply for demanding disclosure that suggests the Epstein case isn't closed, it's still radioactive. Greene also connects this moment to the broader public revolt against institutional secrecy. She frames the Epstein files as symbolic of why Americans feel alienated from their government, a belief that elites operate under different rules, protected by silence and bureaucracy. That message resonates because it aligns with reality people have experienced, not just in this case, but across finance, intelligence, law enforcement, and politics. Perhaps the most consequential part of her statement is her challenge going forward. She doesn't claim the fight ends with a vote. She asks the uncomfortable questions. Will the Department of Justice comply? Will the courts release sealed documents? Will intelligence agencies open their records? Will foreign governments cooperate? Those questions matter because transparency is not a press release, it's an outcome. And a final commitment. To read names publicly of survivors believe it is necessary signals something Washington almost never does, placing reputational risk above political safety. You don't have to agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene on everything to acknowledge this. In this moment, she is articulating what millions of Americans feel but rarely hear said out loud inside the chamber. The Epstein case is not about conspiracy, it's about credibility. And until full disclosure happens, the damage to institutional trust will continue to grow. That's why this video matters. That's why this speech matters. And that's why conversations like this belong under America's civic lens, where power, policy, and the truth are examined without fear or favor.